Let's go to Canberra now and catch up with the former Nationals leader, Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby, one thing I'm really keen to get your thoughts on is you didn't want the government to appeal the decision about the live cattle decision, but the government's going to effectively go to court to defend the malfeasance of the Gillard government.
Yeah, look, I do have my disappointments about this. I can understand some of the discussion around it. They say, well, you know, this creates a precedent for other ministers, but the premise of this was the malfeasance, and that was a word I can say now because the court has so found, of the then Minister Joe Ludwig. Now, I don't think we're going to be finding malfeasance in every minister of the Crown, I hope not. But having an appeal, we can't help but sends a message that we are somehow, a party to the actions of the Labor Party. At the time, I think I was the first shadow minister out, and I remember because I think you might have been in the office, a gentleman by the name of Tony O'Leary was on the phone to me within 2 minutes of me finishing my presser, screaming at me that that was not the position of the Liberal Party, and I said, well, it's my position and it soon will be the position of others.
It's unusual in cases like this. It's not the first case, as you mentioned, where governments have ended up contesting decisions by earlier governments in the court, defending them effectively. Surely what it says, you'd be better off, given that the government would agree with the grievances of the Cattle Association, that they should have just got an out-of-court settlement rather than let it set any legal precedent.
That's where the smart money would have been. You would never let it get to this position. I imagine there was some sort of belief out there that the position, that unfortunately the government, which I'm part of, would win, and well, it didn't. And now the reality is we should have actually gone to a settlement long before this. We now have it sort of crystallised. The cattle producers of Northern Australia are incredibly aware of this, vastly more so than we are. The reality of the situation, it was a disaster for us on both an economic level. It showed complete lack of understanding of our own economy in Northern Australia especially, and zero understanding of our diplomatic relations with our largest and most probably important nation by size, Indonesia. And in the new sort of global politic of the emergence of a superpower in China, we have got more reasons than most to get along very, very well with our closest neighbours. Yeah. And when you suggest to them that you're going to remove one of their meat stables, especially in one of their national dishes where they have small balls of meat in a sort of a soup section, if you say you're going to remove that, then you prove yourself as unreliable. And even on that basis, we should have gone about this in such a smarter way in bringing about a better form of animal husbandry. We Indeed. Didn't. We made a fool of ourselves, and now I hope we're not about to repeat the episode.
Now let's get to the pandemic. We had those protests on the weekend, people just flouting the social distancing rules. We find out there's 4 Labor MPs and 2 Greens senators doing that as well. Yet even with the state border from Queensland, you get Queensland Labor MPs who have been to protests coming to Canberra. Isn't this the politicians just sticking it in the face of citizens? The citizens should abide by the rules, but they're above them.
Yeah, it does, and it's also, I think, on many levels, Chris. First thing is, on a personal level, for me, my mother passed away. We only allowed 10 at the funeral. So I'm sure there was a lot more of my neighbours would love to have gone to my mother's funeral. I know there were a lot of people, trying to work out how they could express their condolences to our family. She was a very well-respected member of her community, incredibly well-respected. But, we complied with the edicts because we were told that that's the right thing to do. When we couldn't have more than 10, but apparently 10,000 can go wandering up and down the street, shoulder to shoulder. And to be frank, I think a lot of them, it was just a look at me sort of process of basically sort of, the desire by many that if there are protesters on, they're there, and if they can stick it up the government in some way, that there'll be a party to that. But if you go back to the more substantive point, Black Lives Matter, the most vulnerable communities in Australia are Indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities as they're called in my area, especially in the remote areas, where COVID-19, coronavirus, if it got into them, would be disastrous. Now, what about those Black lives, or don't they matter? Is it only sort of urban protesters appearance on television that matters most, and secondary to that is the actual real risk, which is to Aboriginal communities, especially in remote areas, at the pinnacle of risk in Australia, I would suggest.
Now, just finally, before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on China, their latest slap at this nation, trying to undermine our education sector as if it's not in enough strife, warning people, students, not to come to Australia because there's anti-Asian racism here.
Well, I'd like to quote Vicky Thompson, who's head of the 8 major universities, that what they say is demonstrably untrue, disappointing and demonstrably untrue. I think that was what Mrs Thompson said. I agree with her, but of course it's got really nothing to do with whether they're safe or not. This is a wider play by China. We know that. We have to understand this is the new world we're living in. They will exert their influence in a myriad of ways and make statements to say otherwise and for other reasons. I think Ambassador Cheng here is a clear voice piece for really where they're off to, saying that our protestations about having an inquiry into COVID-19, they will respond with in kind. I think it's a salient warning to Australia about what happens when you have one big client, you've got one big problem, and also a warning that we have to prepare for a different future. And if we don't, once more, fool is us.